slides get set up, let me introduce my colleagues as well. So I work for HP Labs, located in a secret but disclosed location down the road from here, on Route 1, near the Princeton railway station. So for a long time, HP has not been a big player in security. I can safely say that. I won't get fired. Because in the last few years, security has become much more important aspect of HP's operation, like it is to everyone else now. And so, HP bought a couple of companies in the last couple of years. You might have heard of Tipping Point, and ArcSight, Fortify. And so the stable of security acquisition keeps growing. And so for us in the security lab in HP Labs, it's a very exciting time, partly because of this, but also because the problem of security has become very immediate and urgent. And it used to be that 10 years ago, we had to really knock down doors to get in, have a conversation. But today there are people who actually want to have that conversation with us. So it's a nice space to be. Okay, so I was planning to give a mind-bending talk. But it is just before lunch. So I hope it is not mind-numbing, but you'll see how it goes. All right, so what is the digital forensics problem? So we have this word that's in common parlance, but we don't really know what it really means, because different people seem to think of it in different ways. If you look at a standard forensics conference, what you will find is forensics means grabbing a disk that was impounded from a computer, trying to recover files from it. That is forensics, but that's not all there is to forensics. So the general problem of forensics turns out to be the problem of recreating history. Right? You're given some record of the past. And now you're asked this question, so can you tell me what happened? And this happens a lot because HP is actually in the business of doing this for our customers as well. So there are consultants from HP services who go out to customer sites who have had an incident. And the job is to find out what happened. What data did we lose? The Colonel set it up very beautifully. What crown jewels did we lose this time? It's the question. It's not what crown jewels did we lose, but it's just what is it this time? Because it keeps varying. And the basic challenge for us then is to know exactly what happened. But exactitude is really a hard measure for us to measure up to. So what I'm going to talk about today is the imprecision, the sort of the problem of how to get around this problem that we cannot recreate history exactly, but to some degree of approximation. Okay, so what do we do in security today? This is my favorite slide that I've been carrying around for nearly 10 years now. What we do is we go in with a set of lists, and this is what our consultants do as well. And we do that, and we go through the list, and we go through the list, and we make a report, and that's the end of it. We can't do any better. Okay? And this is a serious problem, because all we do is lists, and these lists don't tell us how good we really are. How do we get around this? Okay? All right, so let me give you a little bit of historical background. So this problem has been going on since at least 1980, as far as I can tell. Maybe there have been papers even before that. But then I noticed that there are some very salient features of this landscape that we must be aware of. Number one, the problems of forensics have remained fundamentally open. And we talk a lot about forensics, but we don't really solve forensics. But more importantly, there's a class of people who talk about the theory of forensics, and this class of people who are in the practice of forensics, so finding out what actually happens in our system. And never the twain shall meet. Why is that? I don't know. But the problem is also that this practice now remains really a manual exercise. You go in there with your tools and you grub around, find out what happened, and you deliver a report. Very little automation. Well, the problem is not standing still either. The threat is much, much larger. Right? So I've listened to lots of war stories, both in the government and the civilian sectors, and even I get scared now listening to the stories I hear. So the problem is immediate, the risk is much higher, the scale is even larger than we had imagined it was going to be 5 years ago. And the problem of 0 days is, I think we might as well accept that it is there to stay. We will always have 0 days as long as we have computer systems. And there's not much data to actually talk about, so that if I have a solution, I can put it up on the data, show how my solution works, show you the data that you can look at, and you can try and come up with a better solution. Okay, so given that history, so this is what we have read, but 3 years ago, my colleagues and I decided to take a really good look at what forensics needs and see if we can come up with something that maybe not perfect, but at least constitutes real progress on the situation. Okay, so this is what we have to first fess up to, right? The first problem is, okay, what it is that we want to do is detect how and when a malicious event has happened. Of course, this is one of the oldest problems in computer security, but it's impossible to know everything that has happened in the system. Well, why? Because we only have so much visibility. Even my NIKSUN system will only tell me so much about what has happened in the system. Resources. We've discovered that a lot of times the monitors that we asked to be put in are turned off. Well, either because we didn't have the human resources to manage them, or it simply ran out of disk space. Whatever. Right? And the third problem is what I call nescience, which is we always seem to be in the problem that if I had known what to monitor, I would have. Guess what? You never know what to monitor. We always have to grapple with the problem that the problems are always going to happen in some space that is slightly off your radar. You just have to deal with it. So the question is, how do we deal with it and what do we do about it? Okay, so the first significant event, I can say, in the history of intrusion detection actually happened, believe it or not, in 2000 when this paper was published. But like all good papers, nobody thought of this very basic fundamental idea before this. Nobody has read this paper after this. Okay, so this person asked this question: why is intrusion detection or forensics so hard? Is there a fundamental problem that we are facing that nobody's really paying attention to? And as a result, we're kind of circling around the problem and trying to solve it without solving the underlying fundamentals of it. Okay, so what did he say? He said, he asked this question of, how good is my system in finding true intrusions? That quantity is related to how good it is at rejecting false intrusions. The basic problem of intrusion detection today, why practical systems are unusable, is because of the tremendous number of false positives. There's so much junk that comes that most system administrators just turn it off, because there's so many things to deal with, and you cannot tell which ones are the real intrusions and which ones are the false ones. And Axel had pointed out that this is actually a fundamental problem. It's really, really hard, not to speak of expensive, to make a system that is good both at detecting the intrusions and rejecting the false ones. That is a fundamental problem. And he showed that, in fact, if we want it for the standard, that for the systems that we have today in practice, you would require such an enormous amount of accuracy that there's no hope of constructing such sensors in the near future. So what is this really? So let's think about this for a little bit. I promised a little bit mind-bending, right? Here it is. The problem is, some of you might understand this, the signal-to-noise ratio is just too low. The number of events that we detect in our networks, systems, is enormous. And relative to that number of events, the number of what could be qualified as security events is so tiny that we cannot build any sensor worth the name that will actually hone in on exactly those events and pick them out for you. And this is related to a problem in probability theory, a Bayesian analysis called the base rate fallacy, which says that if you want to know how good your sensors are at detecting, let's say you take a blood test you want to know if you're diabetic. Whether this test is going to be any good is very, very, very dependent on how prevalent diabetes is in the human population, right? So now say diabetes is what our security incidents are. If the number of security incidents is really, really small, then the quality of the test that measures security is also going to be really, really bad. That's a fundamental truth that this person is talking about. And so we have to grapple with this when we deal with any kinds of forensics or intrusion detection problem. So, good theory is lacking, and partly because we've been ignoring this problem. Like people try all kinds of things, and nothing sticks. They try Bayesian analysis, artificial intelligence, classification, decision theory, nothing works, because we haven't dealt with this problem. So, what do we do now? So the basic issue then we have to deal with is come up with a fundamentally different way of looking at this problem so that we can say, yes, first of all, it does not fall in the same trap that previous intrusion detection problem, the systems fell in, that is, the accepts the trap, and it also moves the needle. It's no point in considering something that doesn't detect anything working, right? So how do we do that? Okay, so we took a very humble approach after realizing that the eminent researchers of this world have not been able to tackle this problem. Said, okay, who are the people? Who are these eminent people who actually solved some part of the problem? Well, system administrators. They have been living with this problem forever, and somehow or the other they've been getting by. So we decided, okay, let's go talk to them. How do they do this, and how do they deal with this problem that has simply passed our researchers? So we need to go talk to this administrators to know how to build a real theory that will work, and we need to have a theory that says this gets around the way state fallacy thought. Okay, so here's an example of what happened when we actually tried to talk to an administrator. So this is an incident that actually happened, right? So observation. So I just noticed these as observations because this is what we sense. The things that are marked as observations are things that we actually have sensors for. The rest just happen. You have to just divine them. Right? Number one, a system administrator notices a large spike in the campus network traffic. This happens every time, all the time. Next observation. So the system administrator, having nothing better to do, because they all look like spikes, said, okay, let me take a network dump for this time period and search for any the usual suspects, malicious IP addresses and so on. And he says, oh, maybe. So the third step is something that happens in somebody's head. These trend microservers are doing something suspicious. No, trend micro, it's a security device. It's your malware detector. It took him a long time to get convinced that maybe the problem is with our malware detectors. Okay, then he says, okay, let me sit at a console. He dumps the memory and he finds code modules in the main memory of these trend microservers. Okay, so that's something you can do. There's a sensor for that. Then he looks at the open TCP connections on these servers. And he says that they've been talking to some other trend microservers on the campus as well. These 4 suspicious ones. Right? So then he does a lot of talking, lot of chatting on the net with other administrators, no sensor for that. And he concludes that those servers are compromised with some 0 day. There was a 0 day in Trend Micro that was only released the week following that attack. And that's what has happened. And so he did a little bit more, and then he discovers that there are 12 compromised Trend Micro machines in the network, and they've all been happily infiltrating the campus network, and nobody knew about this. Okay? So this is what it looks like, sort of easier on the eye. But the reason to put it like this is because now it actually gives us a way to mimic this in a system and see what problems, what steps on these are easy to do and what steps are not so easy. Right? Okay, so let's take these observations one by one and take them apart. Okay, observation 1, spike in network traffic. Could be anything. Right? Okay, so maybe the network is experiencing an attack, maybe somebody's going to some hot site and so on. Okay, observation 2, connections to botnet controllers. It says, yeah, maybe, if somebody is going to botnet controllers, then this machine is compromised, but it cannot be certain, right? And observation 3, suspicious code in memory tells you that something is going on here, but it's not certain. It's very hard to know if a particular piece of code is malicious. Okay, so, and so on, observation 4. So what's my point? The point is that the real problem in dealing with all these, that the administrators are somehow intuitively dealing with, is uncertainty. The problem is that we have all these alarms that come from systems, but these alarms are just given to us as is. So an alarm that is sort of slightly likely to be true is shown the same way as an alarm that is almost surely to be correct. If we solve that problem, then we'll have made great progress towards the false positive problem as well. Because if we can figure out the ones that are more likely to be true than the others, then we can actually have system administrators chase them rather than chase the million others that would maybe have a slight chance of being true. Okay, so here's what we built. We actually built a system that mimics what this system administrator did on campus. Okay, so here it is. The strategy is, first, all those things that I said cannot be sensed. There are no sensors for. We need to find some way to do that. Stuff that's in system administrators' brains. We need to build a program that will do that. We'll be modest. We can't do everything that they can do. We can do the things that we know they do to some extent. Okay? What we have also are the observations, the things that our systems already tell us. The IDS alerts, the net flow dumps, syslogs, server logs, whatever. First thing, we're going to map these observations into that internal model. Right? This is what this administrator does. He looks at it and interprets it. Oh my God, we are in trouble. Right? So we want that, oh my God, we are in trouble map. Okay? The second thing is, he looks into this for specific things, right? So it's not some random, oh, tell me everything about this data, but tell me something specific. This is what I'm looking for because of what I saw. Tell me the answer to this question. Then he gets the answers, processes them some more, and then he gives out some conclusions. Like this is what the administrator does. He forms his conclusions, and these conclusions are either oh, I don't think this is worth looking at, or no, this is high, an event that's really should be investigated, and that's what I'm calling a high confidence conclusion, but he also has the evidence to back it. Say, this is why I want to look at this. Okay? So the next question was, how do humans actually deal with this uncertainty? How do you and I deal with uncertainty that surrounds us? This was the most difficult problem, and it finally gave me an idea of why researchers have not dealt with it. It's a very social problem. And the problem is, that there is no real measure of uncertainty that you can map to numbers. It's really very, very hard. So we talked to these administrators till they didn't want to talk to us anymore. And what we discovered was that they themselves are calibrating these events in their heads in 3 classes. Why 3? No reason. The easiest to deal with. And those 3 are, they are possible events, you have likely events, you have highly certain events. You want to deal with the highly certain events first if they're going to impact you in a big way. And then come down to possible or likely and possible events if you have the time. So the question is now, can we map our conclusions into these 3 classes and say, hey dude, look at these certain things first, and then go down from there. Okay, so how do we map observations to the internal condition, but with this uncertainty tag? It was not easy. So this is what it turned out. So we had to actually build models that tell you what these events look like. So if you see an observation that says high traffic, then it's possible that your attacker is acting in your network. However, if you see that somebody is actually talking to a blacklisted IP address, it's likely that he's compromised or doing something malicious. If you see that in the memory dump of this machine you see malicious code, it's compromised. If you know that for sure it's malicious code, then you can even say it's certain that this machine has been compromised. It's up to you. But these are the kinds of things we want to do, but there is no obvious way to do this automatically. Okay? So this is what the formalism looks like. So you want to do this so that you say, there's some condition that you can observe, there's some condition that you care about, and these two conditions are related by these uncertainty tags. There is a causality that says, oh, if this has happened, then this must be true. It must, but that relationship is only sometimes possible, sometimes likely, and sometimes certain. Okay, so this is what this says. So it's possible that if you have a compromised machine, that it will probe another machine, right? A machine that's compromised doesn't have to probe something else, but it may. It's possible. But if it is probing, you already know that it is probing something, then you probably want to know, yes, this guy is probably compromised. But there are lots of places where we probe our machines just for the heck of it, right? Just for our own management. Our discovery tools work like that. So we can only say it's possible that somebody is compromised if you see that he's probing. Okay? But if you see that somebody has sent an exploit, then you can tell that this is probably a compromised machine may send an exploit, but if you see an exploit being sent, it's probably certain that this machine is compromised. So that's what the C says. And so on. So now you get the idea. So, come on. Okay. I'll skip the math. Here's the system architecture, right? Okay, so how to make this actually real? So here goes. Let's draw the whole thing, then I'll talk about it. All right. So at the very base, you start with some alerts. And we have picked Snort simply because that's what is available to us. And the campus network, that's what they were using. But it doesn't have to be Snort, it's just some alerts. Right? There is some pre-processing, formatting, and that. And then what this needs to be done to do is the system then takes it into this reasoning engine, the thing that maps these internal, the observations to internal models, and then crunches those models. And what does this reasoning engine need? It needs this correspondence. It needs these rules of mapping that says, oh, if somebody probes a machine, then he's probably compromised, and so on. It needs an internal model to compose these conditions. How do you compose it? Okay, remember that. But the use of the system is, now you are system administrator, you sit on the right side and you say, tell me which machines are certainly compromised. I'm not worried about all the possible or likely, just for certain. And the system should be able to tell you, these are the machines in your network that are most likely to be compromised, and this is the evidence. These are the observations that pertain to this machine, and this is what leads me to believe that these are compromised. Okay, so this is what we did. All right, so the next question is, okay, how do we go from Snort to our internal model? So it turns out that it was not so hard. So this is one of the nice surprises of this piece of research, is that the problems that I thought would be hard turned out to be not so hard. The problems that I thought would be a walkover were anything but. Okay, so this was the easy problem. So Snort turns out that people write rules, but they also write these intuitive comments for Snort rules that tell you how likely that this it's true that if this alarm is triggered, that your machine is doing something bad. So we use that. We wrote an automatic parser that just extracts the comments and then converts that into these uncertainty tags. Okay. Okay, so this is what we did. So if you look at a standard Snort rule, and I'm not saying that this will hold true if you have a semantic system or a McAfee system, but for Snort it is works. So for example, the impact field of the Snort rule says information gathering and system integrity compromise, possible administrative access to the server, possible execution of arbitrary code, ease of attack, exploit exists. So how are we going to use this? So we have this internal state that says probe another machine from host to host. What are we going to do about that? Since there is exploit exists, we are going to make it a likely that, so again, this is how administrators go. I'm not telling you there's a hard and fast method to do this, but this is how it's done in practice. Okay? All right. So now, is it feasible? Well, it's not in about 9,000 rules. This was in 2009. So it's probably added a couple of thousand more now. The predicates that we could automatically translate with uncertainty tags was about 60%. The ones that we couldn't deal with, because the language was not certain, was about 40. And the reason I bring this up is that we need to learn to write better rules. Right? Our intrusion detection rules are sometimes so poorly written that they're practically useless. Right? So that's because the people who write rules and the people who use them are completely disconnected. This is another problem that we need, another aspect of this problem that we unearthed as we were doing this. Okay? So now, evaluation. So let's mash this. Right? Let's do take a data set and apply this. So the first question, of course, everybody asks me, how do you know that your system is working? Of course, this is the biggest problem in security. How do you know it's working? I don't have a magic solution to this question, but this is what we did. We said, okay, what we're going to do is take one data set. We're going to train the model. By train, I don't mean in the sense of learning theory train, but by hand to do well on one data set, so that all these uncertainty tags, all these condition mappings are fixed, then apply the model as is to another data set and see how will we do in the next data set. So the two data sets we used. So this is a treasure hunt data set is a classroom exercise. It was in UC Santa Barbara, and where this professor was running this course for several years, where there would be this capture the flag exercise. This common. These kinds of things happen all over the place. Nobody wants to give us the data. This was one place where we actually could get the data, and so we used the data set. Okay, so we ran some results, and this is what it will look like. It says show trace of compromised machines that are certain. That is, the top line is all that matters. Is that tell me all those machines H would then be IP addresses that are compromised for certain. And it will tell you these are the compromised machines that there was 192.168.10.90. It was likely compromised. I guess. Oh, so that's the evidence. So this is the evidence for why a particular machine was considered compromised. Exploit was sent, probe was sent. This tells you that this machine is certainly compromised. Okay? So then we tried it on different data sets without modifying the model, and we did a bunch of other things. I'll skip over this. The reason this honeypot data is good is that it gives you scalability, but it's perfectly useless for validating your technology because nobody can tell you the ground truth. We found all kinds of compromises in the honeypot, but then you go back to the honeypot guy and say, is this true? He says, how do I know? So we just use this for scale. And then so we discovered that scaling is a problem. I will not tell you that it's not a problem. It is a problem because the size of the network interactions goes quadratically with the size of the network, the number of nodes. So we have some work to do there. But it's up to a certain reasonable size, it seems to be okay. Okay, so now the next question is, okay, so have we built a formal basis? So far what I've given you is an informal hand waving and possible likely certain. Can we make this formal? So next, mind-bending thought. Right. Suppose I tell you that your sensor is correct 60% of the time. That is, it senses an attack. And somebody's measured it and says it's correct 60% of the time. So, and it fires. What does it mean? How do you calibrate the response? Well, the easy answer is, okay, with 0.6 probability, the attack has happened. Right? Because this thing fired, and we know that it's correct 60% of the time. Okay, what about the 0.4 that's remaining? Believe it or not, today the 0.4 is allocated to no attack. Right? Is it correct? All I'm saying is that I trust this sensor to be correct 60% of the time. It doesn't mean it's wrong 40% of the time. There's a very subtle difference between those two things. So it doesn't mean that 40% of the time I should invert the answer. What it means is that 40% of the time, I don't know what is going on. It may be true, it may not be true. That was the fundamental kernel of truth that we uncovered through this. That the way we deal with our intrusions is actually a little bit wrong. And so what we need to say is, when an alarm fires, I believe it a certain amount of time, and then I just don't know for the rest. I have to find some other evidence to deal with the remaining part of the uncertainty. So there is uncertainty in uncertainty. Okay? So we looked around for a system that could deal with this, and we found one. I'm not saying that this is the only way to deal with this, but this is one thing we did find, and we built a system out of it. And this is called a system of belief functions, which is an extension of probability theory to say that, okay, if you cannot do what is known as the law of the excluded middle, then you have this the ability to talk about positive statements, but you do not have the ability to talk about negative statements. So I can say something has happened with probabilities X, but I cannot say that this has not happened with probability Y. Okay, I'll skip this theory. It's lunchtime. So this is something that has been, believe it or not, been in the mathematical annals since the 50s. Dempster and Schaefer are these two professors, one professor in the graduate student at Harvard, and they came up with this idea of dealing with beliefs. How do people deal with beliefs? When they don't know that, they know something is true, but they don't know when something is false, which is true with our security problems. Then how do you build a formal theory to deal with this? And so we built this system, and this is a math in any such talk, you have to show some math, otherwise people don't believe it. Okay, now let's apply this to intrusion analysis of forensics. And so we can take an automatically generated graph from my previous project that says, oh, this is how these things combine. And now I'm going to add my beliefs to this graph. Simple enough. Okay, so get on into the first problem. Okay, so what are you going to put numbers against these likely impossible? So we had to kind of do a little bit of a dance and say, okay, we're going to select some random numbers like this. These are again just numbers that we have to pick because we have to pick something. Okay, so if something is probable or certain, it's more than 0.8. That's what it means. Okay, and then we have to come up with a mechanism to combine evidence. So how do you combine evidence when the evidence is not independent? Now researchers like to believe that everything is independent, multiple probabilities, they're home free. But in security, everything is highly, highly correlated. So we have to come up with a way to deal with correlated evidence. We have to calculate weighting factors that say, okay, so now you see that your file system is shooting strange stuff. And then you see your network is spiked. Are these correlated? Sure enough, the network is connected to the file system is exporting files on the network, you are going to see a spike. Just because you see both these sensors fire doesn't mean that you have additional evidence that you have an attack, just slightly more than if it was just the file. So that's what we have to come up with. Okay, more graphs. So the experimental results we tried on some data sets that are flawed. We know they're flawed, but we can't do anything about that because these are all the publicly available data sets. I have run my data sets I have run my algorithms on data sets that I cannot talk about. But this is the other nature of the problem, that if we all could agree on some data sets we could all share, my life would be much, much easier. So there it is. So we collected, we plotted these graphs and found that our sensor, the short description of this plot is that our sensor is actually much better than if we did not have these uncertainty tags. The ROC curve tells us that the rate at which our sensor detects true positives relative to the number of false positives is much higher than what you would have if we didn't have our uncertainty tags, which is what we were trying to achieve in the first place. All right. So this is where we are. It is not a finished work. It is work in progress. It has taken us a long time to get here. It has taken, but we are now confident that we have something that we can actually put to work in a real system. And we are trying to put this in various little systems wherever we can. But the problem is still wide open. And this is the reason I wanted to come here and talk about this. Because if there are people who want to work on this, there is a whole universe in here for people to work on. So I haven't even talked about the real-time problem. This is, assuming you have logs, you have all the time in the world to look at logs. But what if you didn't? What if you had half an hour to decide whether to block this IP address, or maybe not half a second, whether you want to block this IP address or let him go? Whether you want to put up new rules in your firewall or keep them as is. You don't have too much time to deal with these things. And so we have to have systems that are not only good and finely tuned about how certain we are about attacks, but also what we have to do about them. So the basic problem, as I said, is to deal with the problem of what is known as lack of good priors. That is, we don't know what is the distribution of attacks in the world. Just because I have seen so many attacks last year doesn't tell me anything about what I'm going to see this year. And so we have to basically deal with that problem that we cannot make assumptions based on past history on what we see. So we have come up with a new way to deal with uncertainty that is formally sound, seems to address some of these issues, it does not address all of them, but much remains to be done. But